What if the oil filter you trust every time you change your Toyota's oil is actually the weakest link in your entire lubrication system? Most drivers never think twice about an oil filter. You buy one, screw it on, add fresh oil, and drive away. Simple, right? But inside that small metal can is a filter element, anti-drainback system, bypass valve, seals, and construction that can make a huge difference over thousands of miles. And when we started comparing 7 popular Toyota-compatible oil filters, the differences became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about which filter looked the most expensive on a store shelf. We wanted to know which ones could realistically handle the punishment Toyota engines experience over the long haul: repeated cold starts, highway miles, stop and go traffic, heat cycles, dirty oil, extended service intervals, and the constant pressure changes inside the lubrication system. So we put 7 filters under a long-term durability test designed around the demands of a 200,000-mile Toyota engine. Number 7. Fram, the budget option under pressure. Fram is one of the most recognizable names in the oil filter market, and that familiarity makes it an obvious choice for many Toyota owners. Walk into almost any major automotive retailer and you are likely to see a Fram filter sitting on a shelf. The biggest attraction is usually price and availability. If you need a filter quickly, there is a good chance you can find one. But our long-term comparison wasn't about convenience. We wanted to know how the filter would hold up when the mileage starts piling up and the engine is exposed to years of repeated heat cycles. At first glance, the Fram filter appears perfectly ordinary. It is compact, easy to install, and designed to perform the basic job of trapping contaminants before they circulate through the engine. But once you start looking deeper, construction becomes more important. The filter media is the heart of the product, but it isn't the only component that matters. The end caps, center tube, sealing surface, bypass system, and anti-drainback valve all contribute to long-term performance. In a short oil change interval, a filter may never be pushed hard enough for its weaknesses to become obvious. But over a hypothetical 200,000-mile ownership cycle, those repeated intervals add up. Every startup puts the filter through another pressure event. Every long highway trip exposes it to sustained oil temperature. Every dirty oil cycle loads the filtration media with contaminants. The question isn't whether the filter can work. Of course it can. The question is how much margin it has when the engine gets older and operating conditions become less forgiving. That's where Fram struggled in our ranking. We weren't calling it an immediate failure or saying every Fram filter is dangerous. Instead, compared with the stronger designs in this group, it didn't give us the same confidence in long-term construction. For a low-cost, regularly replaced filter on a normally maintained vehicle, it can make sense. But when our imaginary goal is protecting a Toyota engine for 200,000 miles, we are looking for more than basic functionality. We are looking for a combination of filtration, structural integrity, valve performance, and consistent quality. Fram starts our list because the competition gets considerably tougher from here. And if you're building a Toyota specifically for extremely high mileage, this is where the conversation begins, not where it ends. Number 6. Purolator, a solid middle-of-the-pack performer. Purolator is a brand with a long history in filtration, so it would be unfair to dismiss it simply because it didn't take the top spot. In fact, there are several things about the design that impressed us. The purpose of an oil filter is deceptively simple: allow oil to flow while capturing contaminants. But achieving both goals at the same time requires careful engineering. Make the filter media too restrictive and oil flow can become a concern under certain conditions. Make it too open and you may sacrifice contaminant capture. Then you have to deal with cold oil, which is considerably thicker than fully warmed engine oil. Purolator's design sits in that balance, and under normal maintenance conditions, it can provide a perfectly respectable filtering solution. But this test wasn't designed to reward average performance. We were looking for the filter that could inspire the most confidence in a Toyota owner who plans to keep the vehicle long after the odometer has passed 100,000 miles and eventually reaches 200,000. One thing we paid close attention to was how the filter was constructed internally. When a filter is subjected to repeated pressure changes, the media and support structure have to remain stable. A filter that performs well when new isn't necessarily the same filter after thousands of miles of accumulated operating cycles. We also considered the anti-drainback system. This small component can be easy to ignore because you can't see it once the filter is installed. Its job is to help prevent oil from draining backward when the engine is shut off, depending on the engine's filter orientation and design. That matters because maintaining oil within the filter can help reduce the amount of time required to establish lubrication after startup. Purolator performed well enough to move beyond our bottom tier, but it didn't dominate the field. In a real-world Toyota, maintenance habits, correct oil viscosity, filter change intervals, and engine condition are all extremely important. A good filter cannot compensate for neglected oil changes. Likewise, a premium filter isn't going to magically prevent an engine from wearing out if the vehicle is consistently operated with low oil. Purolator therefore lands in the middle of our ranking: respectable, established, and capable, but not the filter that convinced us it had the best overall package for an extreme mileage Toyota. The further we moved up the list, the more interesting the differences became. Number 5. Bosch, strong engineering, but not the final winner. Bosch enters the competition with something many budget filters simply can't claim: a reputation built around automotive engineering. When you pick up a Bosch filter, the expectation is that the design has been developed with serious attention to component quality and system performance. And in several areas, that expectation was justified. Bosch filters are designed to provide reliable filtration while maintaining appropriate oil flow, and the overall construction gives the impression that the filter is intended to handle more than just a few thousand easy miles. But our test was focused on long-term durability, and that's where the smallest details became important. The filter media has to capture harmful contaminants without creating excessive restriction. The internal support structure has to keep everything stable. The sealing surfaces need to remain reliable as temperatures rise and fall. And the bypass and anti-drainback systems have to work as part of the engine's larger lubrication system. Bosch performed strongly across these categories, but the competition at the top was extremely close. One of the most interesting lessons from comparing these filters is that the biggest difference isn't necessarily something you can see from the outside. Two filters may look almost identical when sitting next to each other, yet their internal construction can be very different. That's why simply buying the heaviest filter or the one with the thickest looking shell isn't enough. Oil filter design is a system. The media, valves, seals, and housing all have to work together. Bosch's performance gave us confidence that it belongs in the serious consideration category for Toyota owners. But if your goal is specifically maximizing long-term engine protection, we wanted a filter that offered the strongest overall combination rather than one standout feature. That's what separated the top three from the rest of the group. Bosch also demonstrates an important point about oil filter shopping. Price isn't always a direct measure of quality, but extremely low price shouldn't automatically be considered a bargain either. You're buying a component that sits directly inside one of the most important systems in your engine. Spending a little more for a well-designed filter can be a reasonable decision, especially when compared with the cost of repairing an engine. Still, Bosch didn't win this test. It performed well, but as we moved closer to the top, another filter began showing an even more convincing balance between filtration, construction, and long-term confidence. Number 4, K&N. Built tough, but tough isn't everything. K&N has built a reputation around performance products, and its oil filters follow that philosophy. The first thing you notice is the emphasis on robust construction. The filter feels like a component designed to survive demanding conditions rather than simply sit quietly under the hood. That immediately made it interesting for our Toyota comparison. But there's an important distinction between a filter being physically tough and being the best overall oil filter for a 200,000-mile engine. A strong outer shell is useful, particularly for protection during installation and service, but the engine doesn't care how impressive the filter looks from the outside. What matters is what happens internally when oil starts flowing through it. The filtration media needs to capture contaminants efficiently. The center tube needs to provide adequate support. The sealing system needs to remain reliable. The anti-drainback valve needs to perform consistently where applicable. And the bypass valve needs to function appropriately if the filter reaches a condition where oil flow becomes restricted. K&N impressed us with its overall construction and durability-oriented approach. It is easy to understand why some enthusiasts are attracted to this type of filter. A Toyota that sees towing, high temperatures, long highway drives, or frequent hard use places greater demands on its lubrication system than a vehicle that only makes short grocery runs. But again, our ranking wasn't about one particular driving style. It was about overall long-term confidence. K&N came very close to the top because its design philosophy makes sense for demanding applications. Yet the winner needed to demonstrate more than strength. It needed to offer a balanced package that worked across different operating conditions. This is also where Toyota owners need to remember that filter selection should match the exact application. A filter that fits physically isn't automatically the correct filter. Always verify the correct part number for the specific engine and model year. Thread size, gasket dimensions, bypass characteristics, and application specifications can differ. Using the wrong filter simply because it screws onto the engine is not a smart experiment. K&N therefore finishes in our top 4, and that's a strong result. But it still wasn't the one that made us say, this is the filter we'd choose if our Toyota had to reach 200,000 miles. That decision came down to the final 3, where the differences became much harder to ignore. Number 3, Mobil 1, premium filtration with a strong reputation. Mobil 1 is one of the first names that comes to mind when drivers start talking about premium engine lubrication, so naturally its oil filter had a lot to prove. The filter is designed around the idea that modern engines benefit from high-quality filtration, durable materials, and reliable oil flow characteristics. When we examined it as part of our long-term Toyota comparison, it immediately looked like a serious contender. The construction inspires more confidence than many entry-level options, and the overall design is aimed at protecting the engine under demanding conditions. But the closer we got to the top of the ranking, the more important the smallest differences became. Mobil 1 performed well in several areas that matter for long-term ownership. Filtration quality is obviously important because engine oil doesn't stay perfectly clean. Combustion byproducts, microscopic wear particles, dust, and other contaminants can enter the lubrication system. The filter's job is to capture as much of that material as practical, while still allowing the engine to receive the oil flow it needs. This balance becomes especially important when the oil is cold and more viscous. A filter that looks excellent on paper still has to function under real operating conditions. Mobil 1 gave us the impression of a premium product, and that's why it reached the final 3. But there's a difference between being excellent and being the winner. The winner had to convince us that its entire package was optimized for the specific goal of long-term Toyota ownership. That's where the Toyota Genuine filter became especially interesting. Mobil 1 also highlights a common mistake drivers make when choosing filters, assuming that a higher price automatically guarantees better protection. Price can reflect materials, manufacturing, distribution, branding, and other factors. The best choice isn't necessarily the most expensive one. It's the filter that provides appropriate specifications and reliable construction for the engine. For someone maintaining a Toyota carefully, a premium aftermarket filter like Mobil 1 can be a compelling choice. But if the question is, which filter would we choose for a Toyota we are trying to keep alive for 200,000 miles? We needed to look at the remaining contenders without being influenced by brand reputation. Mobil 1 was close. Very close. But it finished third because two filters delivered a level of application-specific confidence that pushed them ahead. And one of those two was about to prove why the original equipment option still deserves serious consideration. Number 2, Wix, the aftermarket challenger that almost won. Wix is the filter that made this comparison especially difficult. It doesn't carry the same emotional connection to Toyota that a genuine Toyota filter does, but that doesn't mean it should be ignored. In fact, when you focus strictly on filtration and construction, Wix has long been considered a serious aftermarket competitor. The reason is simple. Oil filtration is what the company specializes in. When we evaluated the Wix option for this test, we looked beyond the label and focused on the components that actually determine performance. The filter media, internal support, valve system, seals, and housing all contribute to how the product behaves. Wix delivered a strong overall package. For a Toyota owner who wants an aftermarket alternative, this is exactly the kind of filter that deserves attention. The biggest question was whether it could beat the OEM option. And that's where the final decision became extremely close. Toyota engines are designed around specific lubrication requirements, and the safest starting point is always the correct filter specified for the exact application. An aftermarket filter can absolutely be well engineered, but it still has to match the engine's requirements. Wix came close because its overall design gave us confidence in its ability to handle long-term service. Its construction looked purposeful rather than merely inexpensive. That's important when you're thinking beyond a single oil change. Imagine performing regular maintenance for years, 5,000-mile intervals, 10,000-mile intervals, thousands of cold starts, highway trips, traffic jams, and temperature changes. A filter that remains structurally consistent throughout those cycles is exactly what you want. Wix also demonstrates why blindly choosing a filter based on the lowest price can be a false economy. The filter itself is inexpensive compared with the engine it protects. Even if the differences between products seem small, choosing a well-engineered filter is one of the easiest ways to improve confidence in your maintenance routine. But despite all that, Wix finished second. It wasn't because we discovered some catastrophic weakness. It was because the final filter offered something Wix couldn't quite match: direct alignment with the vehicle's original engineering requirements. That filter was the Toyota Genuine option. And when we placed the final two side by side, the question changed from which one is good to which one would we trust without hesitation. That's a much harder question, and the answer ultimately came down to one filter. Number 1, Toyota Genuine, the one that took the crown. After comparing all 7 filters, the Toyota Genuine oil filter came out on top, not because aftermarket filters are automatically inferior, but because the OEM option gave us the strongest overall confidence for a Toyota application. When you're dealing with a vehicle engineered as a complete system, there is a major advantage in using a component designed and specified for that system. The filter isn't operating alone. It works with the engine's oil pump, passages, pressure control system, oil viscosity, and lubrication architecture. The Toyota Genuine filter is therefore our number 1 choice in this comparison because it combines application-specific design with the kind of consistent construction you want when your goal is long-term ownership. The most important takeaway is that 200,000 miles isn't about installing one filter and expecting it to survive for 200,000 miles. No oil filter should be treated that way. The real test is what happens when the filter is replaced at the manufacturer's recommended service intervals, and the same quality of maintenance is repeated throughout the vehicle's life. Every replacement is another opportunity to protect the engine. Every oil change removes contaminated oil and replaces the filtration component that has been collecting debris. And when you're trying to keep a Toyota running beyond 200,000 miles, consistency matters more than one flashy specification. The Toyota Genuine filter also wins because it removes some of the guesswork. Rather than trying to determine whether an aftermarket filter's internal characteristics are appropriate for a particular Toyota engine, the OEM route starts with the manufacturer's intended application. Of course, you still need to verify the exact part number for your specific Toyota because not every Toyota uses the same filter. That's critical. The winner isn't simply any Toyota filter. It's the correct genuine Toyota filter for the exact engine and application. And that's the bigger lesson from this entire comparison. The filter that wins isn't necessarily the one with the biggest marketing claims or the highest price. It's the one that gives you the strongest combination of correct application, filtration, construction, and dependable service. Wix came incredibly close. Mobil 1 and K&N were strong contenders. Bosch and Purolator were respectable. Fram remained a practical budget choice. But when we had to choose one filter for a Toyota that we wanted to see reach 200,000 miles and beyond, Toyota